First of all, let's talk about leadership for just a second. There are really three elements to leadership, and this is true whether you're a first-line manager or the CEO of a multinational corporation. Those three elements are strategy, structure, and people. But if you don't have a viable strategy, you will not be successful in the long run.
Today, we're excited to welcome Bob Muglia. Bob is a veteran technology executive, investor, and board director with over 3 decades shaping enterprise software, data, and AI. At Microsoft, Bob helped build SQL Server, Windows NT, and Office, and eventually led the servers and tools division as president, driving a significant portion of the company's revenue. After Microsoft, Bob held executive roles at Juniper Networks before becoming CEO of Snowflake, driving the company into a category-defining leader in cloud data. His experience spans building and scaling products at Microsoft, transforming Snowflake into one of the greatest companies in Silicon Valley, and now advising as the board director for emerging data-driven businesses. Currently, Bob focuses on how innovation and ethical values can merge to shape the future of data and AI. In this episode, we explore Bob's reflections on the Microsoft antitrust era and the impact the DOJ case had on Microsoft and Bill Gates. We also discuss Bob's long tenure working alongside Bill Gates and Steve Ballmer, and how the lessons he took from his time at Microsoft helped shape Snowflake as a category-defining company. We also learn from his leadership lessons from building Snowflake and his outlook on the next wave of technology, from AI and agentic software to the rise of robotics.
I had a number of executives that I've spoken with who literally said, we were begging Bob, and you just kept saying, we're not ready yet.
You know, one of the things that's important is also knowing when you aren't ready for something.
Bob, in the early 2000s, you were part of a huge case with Microsoft and the DOJ. And that set a new precedent, especially for the tech industry. I guess the first question I want to ask, when reflecting back at that time, how soon does it take for a company, especially tech leaders, and now with how AI is taking over and there's a huge dominance in the space with some big companies, how long does it take before there's a risk that tech leaders can lose their edge?
It can happen really quickly, I think. In technology, the world changes very, very fast. And it always seems like government is several steps behind. And government has a tendency to want to go after the winners. You know, this is true in Europe for sure, where the regulations are very strict and are actually very focused on anti-competitive behavior to protect companies. Whereas in the U.S., technically, the antitrust regulations are focused on protecting the consumer. It's interesting. The thing talk about, it's worth talking about that case for a few minutes. I mean, talk about that case. I don't want to just jump to the implications and everything too without talking about that case for a minute. You know, that case was a milestone for the industry because it was really the first time. Certainly, I mean, AT&T, there was a breakup of AT&T, which had been a monopoly for 100 years. So that's sort of a little bit different. There was the IBM case prior to that. But the Microsoft case was really significant because it was the first case of a new, relatively young technology company that had gained strong industry dominance in many ways, being targeted by the federal government for behavior we did mostly in the 1990s, mostly around the internet and Internet Explorer, but also in things like Java. My role was actually on the Java side. My defense in the case was in regards to what we did with Java, and you know, we were at a time in the 1990s where Microsoft was growing very quickly. You know, we had a major impact on the industry. And I think there was a lack of realization at that time, certainly by us, about where the boundaries exist between a company that is a young upstart trying to make its way, trying to be aggressive, and then when you become an industry stalwart, the behavioral changes that you really have to undergo. And it's fair to say we didn't do that. We made a lot of mistakes. I'll be the first to say we made a lot of mistakes back then. We didn't realize, none of us realized and thought of it in any way, shape, and form as breaking any laws or having an antitrust. Never believed there was a real antitrust case. Bill, throughout the entire period, did not think the government had a case against us. And you know, he behaved that way, you know, pretty famously when he was very defensive in his deposition that was on film, which was originally not supposed to be shown at the trial, but was shown at the trial. And it wound up reflecting very, very poorly on him and very poorly on the company as a whole. but recognize that that again, this was a lack of full understanding. And a lot of important law got set through that case. And I think it's really had a major positive impact on the industry as a whole to understand how, when companies do become highly influential or even dominant in an industry, how their responsibility changes associated with that. And the other thing I think it's important to say, and I say this again and again, Bill felt to the end that the law was on his side, but what he didn't understand was that antitrust is not about the law. It's a political move. It is always about politics.
Right.
Politics always play a key role in it. And that's certainly true in Europe. It's also true in the United States. I think that it's interesting, you talk about companies losing their edge and things. There's an interesting question that I think a lot of people are asking right now. It says Google lost their edge. Mm-hmm. They remain, an incredible powerhouse. They're still printing a lot of cash. They have what is unambiguously the world's greatest business in internet search. Never been a software business as important or as powerful or as profit generating as internet search. They've been involved most recently in an antitrust case. I was pleased to see the judge recognize that Google should not, regardless of what decisions get made, that Google should not be subjected to the most severe penalties in that case. Mm-hmm. Because the judge wisely recognized that the world was changing very quickly. Right. The irony is that in the, whatever is about 20 years where Google has held predominance in internet search, this is the first time in history where that is truly being challenged. We see it being challenged clearly with ChatGPT, Perplexity, other vendors. Other vendors at this point have an opening to actually change the way people's behavior works on the internet. So it's good that there's some recognition by the government that in fact the industry often polices itself. Technology ages poorly, and when it truly is the Clay Christensen innovator's dilemma that when you own a technology and you have a position of great predominance, it's very hard for you to make that transition as the world changes around you. So the net of it is that Andy Grove was right. Only the paranoid survive. Unfortunately, his company was not paranoid enough.
Well, we've seen that recently now with the NVIDIA deal. I don't know what that's about.
We'll see. We'll see what happens there. I mean, the Intel story is such a sad story. I mean, it had such an incredible position. They were always, they were an arrogant company as well. I mean, Microsoft was an arrogant company too, but they maybe even more arrogant than we were maybe, but it's still sad to see. Then in a world where Microsoft is, depending on the day of the week, the most valued company on the planet, certainly one of the top 2 or 3 most valued companies on the planet, that Intel has become a shadow of its former self. And I think it's a real problem for this country because I think it's really important that we have fabs in the United States and that we have a company that is building world-class fabrication services in the U.S. And Lord knows there's risk associated with TSMC and China and what's happening potentially in Taiwan.
It's an interesting case. It kind of, as you said, the industry sometimes does police itself. Innovation steps in and new technology
comes. It always does in its own way, I think. I mean, I really do think it will eventually. I mean, there could be harm created in the interim. Mm-hmm. I mean, we can have a discussion all night about the potential harms associated with social media and whether the industry will police itself in that regard. But public sentiment does as much to police these things as anything. And the technology shifts so rapidly that you can't count on your incumbency to last to the next generation.
It clearly hasn't caused so much negative impact as far as innovation, because I guess the question can always be, if politics does step in and constantly polices innovation, is there going to be a risk of lack of innovation? Absolutely.
And I think that's somewhat happened after the Microsoft antitrust case. Look, it's no surprise that the downturn that happened at the beginning of the 2000s began literally to the day that Judge Jackson issued his decision to essentially break up Microsoft. It was simultaneous. Wow. And if you were in the Bay Area at that point in time, that you would drive up and down 101 And there was nothing but for rent signs on the commercial buildings up and down those streets. And they don't look like they don't look like they do today. At that point in time, there was a lot less commercial real estate. And this whole industry underwent a tremendous downturn. And it largely happened because of the shadow that the government put over Microsoft. And I mean, it is more than that, of course, but it certainly, it was no coincidence that everything slowed down at that point in time. And we certainly slowed down. I mean, the amount of time that Microsoft executives put into that case is measured in thousands and thousands of hours. And that was just time taken away from the ability to innovate, basically.
It's a distraction, but also when I think about that case, that inflection point for Bill, where, as you said, he wasn't thinking he was doing anything wrong.
No.
But it's the need to consistently keep growing. And at that same time in the 90s, you had Steve Jobs around with Apple, and there was a lot of competition happening in the market. I mean, you worked very closely with Bill.
Yeah.
What was he going through during that period?
Bill was always very paranoid. I mean, Bill believed in the Andy Grove statement. I mean, he always felt that we were 1 minute away from death. And, when the internet happened, he saw that was a potential disruption that could dramatically hurt Microsoft, which is why he was so aggressive in the steps that he took to change the direction and the trajectory of the company. And, put aside some of the OEM deals and stuff like that were ultimately viewed by the antitrust case as not legal. Most of the thing that was done there was just great work, really great work by Microsoft. I mean, building the early days of Internet Explorer, transforming Windows to be very deeply integrated into the internet. It was all great work that was done. And I was very much involved in that on the technical side and met literally with Bill, on multiple times a week during that period in 1996, 1997, when the transition was really underway. After the DOJ case and the loss in the DOJ case, it was a devastating blow to Bill. He was transformed from being, the technical wonder boy to literally the devil incarnate.
Wow. And
you can imagine how difficult that is for somebody, to have to undergo that kind of a transition. And he was the same person, but it was very, very hard on him personally and his family life and everything else. Fortunately, I mean, I think that he was able to step back somewhat from Microsoft. Steve took on a lot of the role of running the company day to day. And then Bill, I think, through his foundation largely, has reemerged as a very positive figure, in the world, giving away tens of billions of dollars. I mean, not many people are in the position to be able to do that like he has. And Bill really was a leader. He was always a leader in philanthropic giving. It was always a large part of the way he thought about his life and what he wanted to do. And he encouraged it strongly at Microsoft. And we were always involved in United Way. There was always a major, every year I was at Microsoft, there was always a major giving campaign focus. And so that was always a big part of him. But he was able to leverage, his personal fortune to help to really do some great things for society. He really has. I mean, done a lot of great things for the world.
What was it like working with Bill before the case even came to surface and shortly after the case?
It was different. Bill was always I like Bill a lot. I mean, I really have nothing but good things to say about Bill, really. But he can be an ass sometimes, for sure. And he became much more difficult after the case. I mean, I think he was feeling attacked in a lot of ways. And I used to, he was running, when Steve took over as CEO of the company, Bill, for a number of years, was what they called a chief software architect. So we would frequently go in, I was doing server work mostly at that time, and we would go in and do project reviews with Bill. And, I told my team, okay, here's the thing. For the first 5 minutes, he's just going to bitch. He's going to tell you what a bunch of idiots you are, how screwed up this whole thing is, why is it even worth his time, et cetera. But then, we can turn him around. And I always found that the way to turn Bill around was to make some joke and get him to laugh. And once I could get him to laugh in a meeting, he calmed down and would really focus on what was at hand and then provide some great feedback. He always had great feedback. But I think he had some emotion that he had to get out after there. It was a tough time for the company. It really was. And it took a long time to recover. Steve was in many ways a very good leader of Microsoft, but in some ways he wasn't. The street, Wall Street was not a fan of Steve Ballmer. So although the company's profitability increased by multiple times and the revenue increased by multiple times, our stock price, our stock price went down immediately after Steve took over, largely because the entire industry took a 50% haircut. So we took a 50% haircut. Right. And it pretty much didn't recover until Satya took over. And that was kind of crazy because the PE ratio the company just had a lower and lower and lower PE ratio basically, and the street was penalizing it in a lot of ways because they didn't like Steve. When Satya took over, he was able to transform the company, come in with some new ideas, and of course now it's done incredibly well.
3 different leaders, incredible leaders. What are the biggest characteristics that are similar between all 3?
They're all very driven, all very product focused, all very customer focused. They're very different though in the sense, Bill was, a great technical visionary and could see the future of technology probably better than anyone. Very deep technically. Steve was not a deep technologist, an incredible finance guy. He's probably had some of the best. He's the best at mathematics of almost anyone I've ever seen. Used to be able to, and I swear this is true, that we would, every year Microsoft had a process called a mid-year review cycle, which sort of is crazy these days because we did it once a year and you can't do these things once a year anymore. The world changes too fast. But where they literally did a tour around the world where we went to all the continents of the world, and the leaders, the sales and marketing leaders would all get together and review every country in the world. And it was like typically it's a 1 to 2 hour process for each country. And there would literally be 100 people in the room. And so we'd have like 50 of us travel. And then the country people would come in. And, at the time we used to do these presentations on 11 by 17 paper. And there'd be like 4 PowerPoint slides on each of these things. So there'd be 100 slides. So it'd be like 400 slides or something like this in this deck. But then one of the key slides, which took up the entire sheet of paper, was what Steve always called the Rev Sum, which was a look at all of the products Microsoft had and the different kinds of distribution channels for the geo that you were in, for the place in the perspective of where you were in. And I swear to God, there were 2,500 numbers on that piece of paper. And so you'd have this big 11 by 17 piece of paper with 2,000 plus numbers on it. And the number of times the meeting started with Steve going, "This is just bullshit. I know it's bullshit because that number is wrong." At that moment, all the finance guys, they're there. They start pulling their laptops out and trying to look at these things. And then you have about a 10-minute period where the general manager was trying to apologize and figure out. Well, the funny thing I got to tell you is 9 out of 10 times Steve was right. That number was wrong. And, and he knew it was wrong because he had just been in the Czech Republic, which is the same size as this, and he knew that their sales of this were that, and how could this be that when that was that? I mean, he had that kind of multi-dimensional brain attached to him. I still, to this day, we used to, in France, so we do this in France at this horrible hotel right by the airport. And it was just this miserable hotel with horrible food, tiny little rooms. And this process would run from 8 in the morning until 2 a.m. every day. I swear to God, and start again the next day at 8 in the morning. And I've said many times that when I die, if the good Lord sends me to hell, it's in a mid-year review with Steve in Paris. It's always after midnight, and he's like, "Mug, what's the server the server sales in Sweden this year?" And it's like, and I'm like, "Oh no, I don't know the number."
Bob, ever since Microsoft, you had incredible, as I said, an incredible journey at Microsoft. But ever since then, you've also done amazing things. Besides the leaders you worked with at Microsoft, today and over the last 10, 15 years, but I guess more relevant to now, who are some leaders or founders, CEOs that you're directly working with that resonate that same level of focus on customers and operating in the same way?
Well, I'll go back to my Snowflake experience because that's the one that was the most, the most relevant to me, and I had the closest with people. I think Benoit and Terry as technical leaders, which were really the 2 founders of that company, Marcin, the 3rd founder, they were incredible. They were incredible engineers with incredible customer focus. They always wanted to do what was right. And they did so much to make that company. I'd also say Chris Degnan, who ran the sales organization from the first salesperson till he left in March or so of this year. So he hired over 2,500 people or something like that. Hired every single one of them. He was always focused on the right thing for the customer and for the people. And one of the things about Snowflake that was important, and I played my role in this too, was really the customer centricity of the company. Trying to really make the company focus on we called it putting the customer first. And
Sure.
Always just say we don't succeed unless our customers succeed. And I think that's probably the most important thing of every company, every small company that's being born, is to have that sense of customer centricity. I was fortunate. I learned it directly from Jeff Bezos. Microsoft used to have these CEO summits, and I would go to those, and I had the opportunity to spend a little bit of time with Jeff, and I really, really, really understood what he meant when he talked about making Amazon the most customer-centric company on earth, and he really did do that in a lot of ways. I mean, Amazon. I think it's one of the reasons why people love Amazon so much is that. That from a customer perspective, they do have a great experience. They really do.
Yeah, they do, and I think it's. When you think about being a consumer myself of Amazon, Apple, Microsoft, it's at the end of the day, they are the stakeholders, right? You have you have your team and you have your customers. It's a balancing act, but ultimately it is the most important thing is the customers. Bob, Snowflake. I have spoken to many people about you, and one thing that seems to be a common theme is discipline. This relentless level of discipline when it comes to when are we actually ready to give the product to the customer. In the early days of Snowflake, there's no denying that Snowflake being the biggest software IPO in history and the successes you had, where do you get that level of discipline?
Microsoft. That just purely came from Microsoft and the realization of what it takes to ship great software, and having watched not so great software ship from Microsoft and then really great software ship from Microsoft, I can tell the difference. I remember try and tell the bad stories because I remember those is more clearly in some ways than I remember the good stories. When we were in that period after the DOJ trial, which was a tough period, as I said, we were trying to really do some important, great things to Windows, and that was when we really had shifted back from much of it. We've been focusing a lot on services, and now had made the decision to really focus again on Windows and Windows centricity and sort of some proprietary natures there. And we had spent a lot of time working on a version of Windows client that was known as Whistler, so what's often known as a code name. And essentially that project was a total failure, and it didn't really work. And we wasted a fair amount of time on that. The company did. I wasn't directly involved, but the company did. And then, in the reset of it, in an attempt to get a good version of Windows out, they lowered the expectations significantly of the product, and they went to produce this product that was ultimately released under the name Windows Vista. And, I remember, going to the leader of the project at the time, Jim Ulchin, who's a great guy, still a good friend of mine, and saying, this is about 2 months before release, I said, Jim, you can't ship this thing. You can't ship this thing. It doesn't work. I was used to versions of Windows where 6 months before we shipped it, you would say, ready to ship this. It's done. I don't see anything. But there was issues. When you dealt with all of the compatibility and all the issues that thousands of different customers had, there were plenty of bugs, thousands of bugs to fix. But you could use it inside Microsoft every single day and not see anything wrong. This thing was different. I was seeing problems everywhere I looked. I'm like, you can't ship this thing. You're 9 months away. If they had taken another 9 months, Vista would have been a good product. They needed 9 more months. And they chose not to take that 9 months, and it had a real black eye.
What was the urgency?
Oh, it was late. I mean, it was so late. It had been years. We had shipped Windows XP. You can
Which was
remember.
great. XP was amazing.
XP was a great product. XP was a great product. And then, in addition to all of the nightmare of the DOJ stuff that was going on, that was really the beginning of the security attacks on on the software industry. And Microsoft was the biggest target. I mean, the Mac had plenty of security vulnerabilities too, but nobody gave a shit about it because Mac was so low penetration back then. And so, Windows was attacked. And so we had to take, about 12, 18 months to build XP SP2, I think was the big one, if I recall correctly.
Right.
Which fixed all the security vulnerabilities. And Jim drove all that, and it was very good work. It was really good work because it closed down tremendous security vulnerabilities. But it was just a service pack release, for God's sakes. The product was exactly the same. It just didn't have the security vulnerabilities. And so we had done that. We'd had this nightmare where we'd gone down this path of trying to do integrated storage and trying to build the file system of death inside Windows client. And we failed on that journey multiple times, the integrated storage. Bill had a vision of trying to have, essentially, if you think about the real vision, was Google on your PC in some ways. It was the idea that you could find anything inside your company and things like that. And we tried to build that multiple times. And I was very involved in a lot of that, by the way. And we went down that path with Windows Whistler, and that was a total disaster. Literally the only time in my entire life where I've seen a major product organization lose control of their code base.
Wow.
We literally lost control of the code base and had to back up and use an older version of the code to start again.
And especially a giant like Microsoft.
Yeah, it never happens. It never happened before or since.
So when we think about the discipline at Snowflake, like I said,
So that's the negative story, by the way. There's lots of good stories at Microsoft.
yeah. But I guess the Vista story and many like those that maybe the public didn't see taught you that level of discipline,
for
that
sure.
focus.
Meanwhile, I was shipping the server products at that time. We didn't have those problems, right? It was our version of Windows that they went back to. It was the Windows. They literally took an old version of the software that the Windows Server Group had been maintaining.
Right.
So yeah, we saw that, and when I joined Snowflake, this was June of 2014. Benoit and Terry had started the company in basically in August of 2012. So it's almost 2 years old when I joined. They've been building the database, and it was a solid alpha level database, but it was built in a way that the database was good. The functionality wasn't all there, but it was a good SQL database, but the entire environment that it lived in, the state management, was literally one MySQL server, which is hardly going to work, and the ability to update it, to do steady CDs, to do weekly updates, things like that. None of that was present. And there were a lot of key features like security features and things like that were missing. And when I joined Snowflake, we were doing releases every couple of months, internal releases every couple of months. And there would be a list of, a bunch of features that they were going to get done during that period of time. And after a couple of those periods, I noticed that at the end of the period, they didn't finish any of the features that they said they were going to finish. They did a lot of other stuff. They were working hard, but they weren't progressing with clarity as to a destination. So so late that year, I kind of took control. As the CEO of the company, I kind of took control of the process, and first and foremost, determined what the feature list was for what we call GA. You might call it MVP. MVP would be a sort of more common industry term. And so what are the features that are needed for a production class cloud data warehouse server? It certainly included security, it included encryption, it included some kind of backup solution, a bunch of features and capabilities, and two-factor authentication, things like that. Plus this ability to upgrade the software, downgrade if we needed, et cetera. And then I ran that process for about 7 months and sort of turned our weekly. We had a Monday all hands meeting, and the only thing anyone in the company cared about was the status of that product, because the sales team was just salivating for it, and everybody else, that's all they cared about. So I literally turned the weekly all hands into a status meeting on the engineering team. where I'd call on people, Daniel, you were working last week on the the two-factor authentication. What's the status of that? You're supposed to check it in on Tuesday. He'd give his report, et cetera. What happened is I think it established clarity first and foremost about what mattered and what didn't matter.
And accountability, right?
And then the second thing was it enforced accountability. Because when people were supposed to finish something and they didn't finish it, literally the entire company had visibility to it.
Yeah.
So people were working super hard to get things done. And we delivered that, I think we were able to, in a very short period of time, really, if you look at it, 3 short years from when Benoit and Terry started working on the product, to deliver a true production class enterprise data warehouse, cloud data warehouse. And most people would say that's pretty remarkable.
Bob, that's interesting. So what you're saying is you turn this meeting into a status meeting. You kind of put the spotlight on the individuals, creating that level of accountability. If I'm that person, I'm thinking, I need to be ready.
You bet. And it wasn't nasty. It was never nasty. It was like, okay, you're struggling. Hey, Benoit, can we get someone in to help Daniel? Because it looks like we're falling behind on that. That would be the next sentence.
Where did this come from? That's I've never heard this before, but the sort of management leadership style there, and which achieves the level of velocity and speed that you need.
Well, it's not about making people feel bad. It's about getting the job done.
Of course, yeah.
And it's making people, my job was always as a leader, and I think this is true whether you're a first line manager or whether you're running a very large company. Your job as a manager is to get 100% out of your employees. And you want them to, and when you're a startup, that means 80 hours a week, okay? I mean, that's what that means.
Right.
And sorry, that's what it means. Yeah. And it's not a 35-hour a week job. And so, working nights, weekends, whatever it takes to get this thing done. I was working nights and weekends. Benoit and Terry certainly were. I mean, they were working later than I was, and those guys worked their butt off. They set an example of what it means to work hard. So it was easy to, encourage everyone else to be there late hours. And of course, there was no work at home back then.
I had a number of executives that I've spoken with, a couple that I've had on the show, who literally said, we were begging Bob for the product. Like, we want it. And you just kept saying, we're not ready yet.
Yeah. Well, one of the things that's important is also knowing when you aren't ready for something. And, working with customers and understanding what their requirements are. And then, focusing to meet those requirements and then being clear about when we are ready.
Mm-hmm. Take me to the beginning, Snowflake. First of all, how did it all happen? Like, how did the introduction happen? How did you connect with whoever you ended up?
I connected through Sutter Hill, which was the VC that funded the company originally. I had known Stefan Dykerauf, who was a VC partner there, is a partner there, and he and I worked together at Juniper, which is where I worked after I left Microsoft. Juniper kind of got me down to the Valley. I sort of was happy to, although my wife stayed up in Seattle and I, lived part-time down here. I did the Monday morning through Thursday afternoon commute for 8 years.
Wow.
The Alaska Airlines commute. And built got a condo in Menlo Park so I had a home base down here. But I got connected to Snowflake and to Benoit and Terry through Sutter Hill. And, when I first met with them, their sort of style was to interview people was to have somebody do a presentation on something. And I don't think I knew that when I went in. And I don't know what I talked. They asked me to talk about some leadership thing I did at Microsoft. And so I sort of explained it. I honestly don't even remember what it was. But, then I interviewed them and I tried to really understand what they were doing. And, they explained to me how they were leveraging the cloud and really the combination of S3 or blob storage, highly, very, very durable storage that was, that had relatively low latency, but not even close to the latency numbers that you'd get out of a SAN system. So it wasn't like you'd expect from a block database, but it was still relatively fast. That together with, high-speed networks, and then the ability to spin up and spin down compute on demand, how those three characteristics allowed them to build something totally different. And I understood technology well enough to realize that if that worked, it would be a total game changer in the industry.
So, Bob, when you took the job, how big was Snowflake size-wise?
34 people.
34 people. Products there or
Product was in alpha stage. There were 2 or 3 customers that were running it.
Design
Nobody was
partners or
paying.
customers? Paying customers?
No paying customers. It's easy to remember the revenue. At the time, it was 0.
0. Okay. And when you left, how big was it size-wise in terms of employees, revenue?
A couple $100 million and about 1,200 employees, something like that.
What's the biggest reason as far as your leadership is concerned, and I know you're probably not going to take a lot of credit for this, but your execution of how you led the business, what were the key lessons from that period that you feel, looking back today, played a huge part in the success of Snowflake?
Well, I mean, I think a couple things. I mean, one was having a product that was just so good. I mean, it helps having a great product that's better than anyone else's out there. I mean, it really is. Having a highly differentiated product is really critical. And it's hard, by the way. Most products are not that differentiated. Right. Most companies aren't in that position to have that. I think we saw, at least for a little while, we felt that way with OpenAI, when everybody saw what ChatGPT could do. Now, I mean, I don't know how differentiated. I mean, there's a half a dozen models that are quite competitive with what OpenAI has. So having a highly differentiated product. And, but the press used to say to me, what's your biggest surprise? And I, through the day I left, I always said that there's no other Snowflakes. Nobody else has duplicated this. Now, the closest at the time was BigQuery. And BigQuery, has become quite a good product. When I started, BigQuery was not a SQL database. That's not where its lineage was within the Googleplex, and it only was in 2017 where they added I think it was 2017 or 2018 where they made SQL the primary interface into BigQuery, and for a long time, it just didn't have the semantic capabilities that we had with Snowflake. They've fixed all those things, I think, over time. Now, of course, there are competitors. There's certainly quite a few competitors out to Snowflake. One of the other biggest things I think is the customer-centricity. We never lost customers. The first 6 customers we got in that first year I was there, 2014, were all still customers when I left in 2019. Every single one of them. And, the first customer we had, which I think our first deal was 14,000, was well over $1 million in annual revenue. It's a company, it's not a major brand. It was an advertising customer. We did a lot in advertising and gaming in our initial customers.
Who was that customer that I heard it was Capital One or like
There
one
were a couple of customers, at those early Hadoop World shows, we ran into a company called Localytics, right, which was doing mobile advertising and things. And they had been running a Vertica database, this big Vertica cluster. And Vertica is kind of like a Lamborghini sports car, sort of. It's a fast database, but it's very picky and difficult to work with. And
it's a great analogy.
they literally were importing so much data into the system that there was not enough cycles to ever delete things.
Right.
They couldn't delete any of the data, which is really a problem because it just gets bigger and bigger. And so it took us 12, 18 months to add the features and capabilities that they needed for us to win that a customer over. And we were successful in doing so. The Localytics and the partnership with Localytics helped to make the Snowflake a very successful product. The first true enterprise customer we had was Capital One. Mm-hmm. And Capital One was extremely sophisticated in terms of cloud adoption. They were really the first financial institution to deeply adopt the cloud. And they had been very focused on AWS. They were completely on AWS, and they had been working on Redshift. They had completely embraced Redshift, but they essentially had a failed Redshift implementation. They could not make Redshift scale to meet their needs, which isn't surprising because it wasn't going to scale. I mean, that was a company that ran its business on Teradata, and they were one of Teradata's biggest customers, and Teradata was quite a good product. It could scale very well for the technology base that it was on, but it was just very expensive. It was a white glove product. It was clearly the raised floor computer room white glove sort of product. But Capital One benefited heavily from that, and they were very deeply. They ran the bank on Teradata, and when they needed was a replacement in AWS. And so, I remember when I was meeting with them the first time, and they explained what they needed, and we eventually determined how we could build that, and we presented that to them, and we worked in partnership to build the features that they needed, the enterprise class features, things like multi-site failover, because they run the bank on it, and if a site goes down, they needed the ability to recover into a secondary site. And that was a bunch of work on our part, a huge amount of work on our part. But it's a great feature, and a lot of customers use it today.
A couple of things I want to unpack there. So with the first customer and Capital One, what are the differences as far as challenges that you faced in terms of delivering the products to both customers?
Well, both required an enormous amount of work from the engineering team. They required an enormous amount of work from the engineering team. But both had the attribute that they made the product better for everyone. Not everyone. Not everybody needed all the features that they needed, but the sophisticated customers did. We never had a circumstance where we needed to do one-off things for customers. We were always able to build things in a way that was
off the shelf,
was generically usable by multiple customers.
Right.
But what we did is we prioritized, like any small company, we prioritized what we were doing based on what our customer demand was. You give me $1 million, put $1 million deal in front of me, and it causes some increase in priority.
Sure. But how do you, I guess, distinguish and decipher between the features that a customer wants that you feel it's $1 million deal, but is this really going to scale, and the ones that perhaps are important to focus on in terms of the features that the customers wants?
I was always what was called a program manager at Microsoft, which is a lot of, in the Valley, it's called a product manager. But it's a little different than, program manager job is a little different than a typical product manager, because it doesn't really have the marketing component to it and the business component as much. It really was product specification and then, project management and things like that. So, that's who I was. That's what I grew up in Microsoft. And, I learned really early in my career at Microsoft how to listen to customers. And I think this goes back to, one of the first products. The first product I worked on was SQL Server, but it was in 91 I moved on to the Windows NT group and helped to build the early versions of what at the time was called Windows NT, and ultimately became Windows Server, as well as the base product for today's Windows. That's Windows today. And so I spent a lot of time meeting with customers and listening to what they need, they say they need. And what's really important is to distinguish between, what a customer really needs and what they say they need.
Right.
And they're not the same thing.
Of course.
The customers say, I need you to build this. And I'm like, great, what's your problem you're trying to solve? Let's talk about the problem you're trying to solve.
Sure.
Let's not talk about the solution. Let's talk about the problem. Because probably 4 out of 5 times the right answer is to not build what the customer tells you to build. It's to build the solution, because they can't see what you can see. They can't see what your roadmap is. They can't see the capabilities. They have no way of envisioning what's possible in the product that you're building. They just know they have a problem, and they think they know how to fix it. So if you get back to what the problem is, the root problem is, you can then come up with a solution that works in the context of the product you're building. And generally speaking, that allows you to build something that's applicable to others as well.
So you're saying if a customer comes to you with what they believe they need, the first thing you're asking is,
what's your problem?
Then
what's the problem you're trying to solve?
Then you can prioritize.
And you can listen to that problem, and you can determine, is it really a problem? How important is it? There was a case of one customer, one of our earlier customers, who were using us with Spark at the same time. And they were doing a lot of things in Spark that they could have easily done in Snowflake. And they kept complaining that Snowflake was too expensive. And I said, I eventually said to the customer, the salesperson almost fainted, but I said to the customer, that the problem isn't that the product is too expensive. The problem is you're using the product the wrong way. And if you look at what you're doing, you're spending all this money on Spark. If you didn't spend that money on Spark, you could get it done for a fraction of the cost on Snowflake. But you think we're expensive because you're spending all that extra money, and they actually wound up doing that.
So how involved were you on the customer conversations? Like, when did you come in? Chris pulls you in. in every customer call in the early days?
No, well, obviously not. I mean, I there were a lot of sales calls I didn't participate in, obviously, and as the sales team grew, especially, I just, you just would get involved where it made sense. It was most useful most of the time to call me in either early in the sales process, to help get a deal going, or late in the sales process to help get a deal closed.
Yeah.
Sometimes I would go in the middle because, or if into an existing, the other thing is to go into an existing customer, just do the rah-rah kind of stuff and that was fun. They were really fun because the customer would always show me the dashboard they had and all the stuff they were doing. And that was really fun. I enjoyed that thoroughly. But it was largely to help either start deals or to close deals. But I was involved in a lot of things. And I really thoroughly enjoyed working with the sales team. And really respected the work they did. I think it helped that my dad was a salesman. I used to remember him bitching about how the plant was building the wrong product and how he had to go apologize to the customer and stuff. So I had a lot of empathy for the difficulties that salespeople have that I think a lot of tech CEOs don't have. And I think my upbringing caused me to really understand how important the sales process really is. But I thoroughly enjoyed that. I actually thoroughly enjoyed that as part of what we did.
Having a great product, which Snowflake did, and a very strong sales team is a amazing combo. But some companies probably have an amazing product, not so good sales team, or a really good sales team, not so great product. Can the two things kind of work exclusively? Can a sales team that perhaps isn't the Snowflake sales team, but with a great product, sell in the same way?
Yes, but it slows them down. Yes. It's much harder for a great sales team to sell a bad product than it is for a good product to sell itself. And some products do sell themselves. Some products can be self-serve, and if it's developer products especially, maybe the details of the sales organization don't matter as much. But the enterprise still expects a sales process, and I don't think you can get around that. I wasn't sure how much the pandemic would change that or anything else, but so far I don't think so. I think the ritual of walking into the 42nd floor of the Manhattan building and meeting with the financial customer is still a ritual that you have to go through.
Of course.
And so I do think you need, I think you need both. I think both are muscles that good companies, certainly great companies, need.
But with your time at Microsoft and at Snowflake, you saw many products that did really well, and obviously the ones that didn't. How much does the UI of a product really impact the
a lot,
right?
A lot. It was never one of Snowflake's great strengths either, by the way. It was not, we had a UI, it was a decent UI. And the fact that we had a UI was by itself a strength because a lot of the competitors didn't even really have a UI to speak of. So the fact that we even had one. But I came from Microsoft where SQL Server had a really nice UI. But they had 20 years to work on it too. So, we were certainly short of that. But in general, I think UIs are important. I think they remain important even in today's world of large language models and everything else. I think they're changing. All of a sudden English becomes one of the key interfaces into the UI. And I think a lot of the UI work that people have built and are part of the moat that they've developed over time as they've built a strong customer base, that those are going to become irrelevant over time. I think it's really interesting to think about how every class of applications is going to get remade in a world where agents are driving the business process. And I think a lot of what people have in existence is not necessarily an asset going forward.
What do you mean by that?
Well, I think that if you look at what, just look at how people are writing, in the industry that has been the most affected and disrupted by by agentic software and by LLMs is the developer industry. That's what software development. And, if you look at Claude Code, it looks nothing like Visual Studio. They've moved a long ways away from that. And I think that Visual Studio had 1,000 little features associated with, how you go in and you edit and all the different sorts of things. And it was incredibly good at that sort of stuff. And the LLMs kind of just do that for you now. It just sort of does that. And so those things are changing. How will CRM change? How will HR applications change? I don't know. And now, of course, the agents can build the UI kind of almost by scratch. That's the thing they're the best at doing.
Yeah.
Even today, I mean, I don't think I would trust an agent to write a stateful SQL database. Not today, maybe
Not yet.
maybe in 18 months. I don't know. I asked Ben White. I just saw him a few nights ago. I asked him how long it would take him because he's using Cursor a lot, and I asked him how long it would take he and Terry to build Snowflake today if they had this. He thinks it would cut it by 50%. He thinks it would cut it by 50%, which I think is probably a reasonable guess. But for UI development, these things are incredible at it today. I mean, today they're quite good. They're better than most of the job shop houses that you send UI development out to.
Yeah. You said earlier on, Rob, that technology doesn't age well.
No, it's like fish.
So it's not wine.
No, definitely not.
But with AI, especially, and this is the next topic I'd love for us to discuss, is the next shift, from SaaS to agents. With AI, and if we get to the world from AI to super intelligence, is there a world where technology can consistently reinvent itself so it does age well?
Sure, that's different. I mean, that's a totally different thing. I mean, yeah. I mean, and it might be doing that almost today. I mean, we don't even have to get to super intelligence. You can ask agents to to refresh a code base today, and they can do something in 10 minutes that would take humans weeks or months to do. Now, I don't know whether we fully trust them today, but over time, that trust level is going to continue to improve as the guardrails get better and better in that software. So yeah, but that's self-improving software. That's not version aging and then having to deal with what it takes to work at human speed to fix things.
I feel like with all the different evolutions and how, we started the conversation around the DOJ and innovation and how the industry operates, the reason I asked the question around the analogy of does technology aging well or not, it's just, are we entering this new evolution, this new AI evolution, which is different to prior technology shifts that allows for technology to keep improving on its own, where you don't need to...
Potentially without us.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking.
Question: what's the role for us over time? Yeah, no, that's the question. I mean, for sure. I mean, this is I have been fortunate enough to have seen many shifts in technology through my career. I mean, I started my career on mainframes at college, and then mini computers when I'm in my first job, which was at ROM here in the Bay Area. A company that made digital telephone systems, and I watched the mini computer generation be replaced by the PC generation. Saw the advent of the internet and the move to the mobile world and then the cloud world. Now we're entering this world of LLMs and AI and agentic software. I think from an application perspective, I often think of agentic software as the fourth generation of application software. When I started in my career in the early 80s, all software was bespoke. It was written by the company, often in a language like COBOL or Fortran. And it ran on mini computers. It ran on a PDP-11 or it ran on an IBM mainframe. The creation of the SQL database, and I largely credit this to Oracle. I mean, IBM invented it, but Oracle really popularized the SQL database. The SQL database pulled all the state management and transaction management into a standardized piece of software, which allowed for the creation of packaged applications. Right. And in the 80s and into the 90s in particular, we saw applications like SAP and Siebel come into existence, that are enterprise class software applications. And then we saw a whole class that we were involved in very, very closely, which was SQL Server together with Visual Basic application, which really automated small businesses, which up until the 1990s were pretty much all pencil and paper. I mean, pretty much all the business accounting in small business. It's hard to imagine it today, but it was all done on pencil and paper. And it was those applications, packaged applications for dental offices and real estate agents and on, that allowed all of these smaller companies to begin to automate. Those apps all became SaaS apps. So the packaged apps is the second generation. The SaaS apps, which really started with Salesforce and now includes pretty much everything, every application you run today pretty much is a SaaS application, is sort of a third generation. And those applications found their permanent home in the mega scale clouds, Amazon, Microsoft, or Google. And now we're entering a world where a whole new generation of applications are being built. It's super early days on this, but the agentic apps are going to revolutionize this, because now all of a sudden you have AI software that is managing the workflow and in making the decision making. It's driving the decision making inside the app. It removes the person. I mean, right now the person is sort of the intermediary between these applications, and largely agents talking to agents are going to replace that. And I think we're, a year ago I would have told you it was early and it wasn't happening. But I think the reasoning models have changed that dramatically, because they now have enough thinking capability and decision-making capability so you could begin to trust them. Mm-hmm. And there's really a couple more things. I mean, I think you need, in addition to the reasoning models to help you with decision-making, we're still in the early days of building semantic models to describe what the business is. AI is amazing, but it's statistical software that can help make great decisions because of the knowledge and learning it has. But it can't see through walls and make it does have this characteristic that if it doesn't know the answer, it tends to make shit up, which is not very helpful, in fact. So you have to provide it with a context, and therefore you have to explain to the AI the semantics of the business that it's trying to solve, and that's why semantic model is important. The other piece to it that's really important is state management. I'm a database guy, right? So I care about state. And every agentic workflow is a long-running workflow by definition. So state needs to be maintained through the different steps in those workflow, because failures will happen all the time. And there need to be ways to recover from those things, and you can't forget. Otherwise, the stuff will just error and people will get frustrated. So those technologies are still maturing. All of them are maturing. The reasoning models are maturing, the semantic models are maturing, and the state management's maturing. But they're all critical to this next stage of applications.
If we were sort of comparing this shift in technology, AI, to the mobile age, let's say the Nokia 3310, is this currently the Nokia 3310, or are we at the iPhone 13, 14, whatever?
Well, not 13, 14. You could say we were at iPhone 1. I mean, that's,
So definitely not Nokia 3310.
So I mean, was that when was the 3310 Nokia's model when the iPhone was introduced?
No, that was way before. So that would have been in the...
Because the iPhone was introduced in what, 2007?
Right. So
I mean, I think we might be at 2007, 2008.
So we are far away from where this is going to be.
Oh yeah,
but the time to get there is
much more compressed.
Right.
And things are running at hyperspeed.
Everyone's talking about this 18-month. Like everyone I speak with is literally saying 18 to 24. What is this 18? Why 18 months?
Well, I mean, I don't know. I mean, it seems like it's the only horizon you can look. You can't look any further than that to some extent, right? I mean, it seems like so much has changed in 18 months. A year ago, I wouldn't have been able to tell you. I mean, we the 01 model had come out, but it was still kind of primitive, and I don't think anyone fully got it yet. It really was 03 that kind of, certainly that's when I grokked it. That's when I understood how important it was. And, I think what we've seen is these step changes happen. Every time we've thought that the things are plateauing, there feels like there's another step change that happens that moves things in new directions. And I think in an 18-month horizon, we can see the changes that will happen. I mean, I think coding will get really good in the next 18 months. Yes. Really good. I think it's good now, and I think it's going to get really good in the next 18 months. And I do think we'll start to see more and more of these agentic applications taking replacing more traditional SaaS applications. The other thing, which may be a little further away, but I think is even more profound, is the shift that robotics will have on everything in the world.
Right.
And I think that's the biggest change we'll ever see. I mean, that's Isaac Asimov and the iRobot stuff.
I mean, seeing driverless cars right now freaks me out.
We're in San Francisco and I see all the Waymos. I'm looking forward. They're not down in Menlo Park yet. I'm looking forward to them going down to Menlo Park. They do have a lot of spinning things on it. Come on, there can't be spinny things on these cars. You can't have spinny things on them.
They have them in LA though.
Yeah. But there's still spin down.
Yeah,
Still spin.
yeah.
You know, the LiDAR has got to become electronic. It's just got to become electronic. I mean, we can have a debate about whether Elon's right and cameras are enough. But hey, my Tesla drove me up here from Menlo Park. I mean, I didn't do a darn thing. I literally did not touch that car from the moment I left Menlo Park until I was parking just across the street. I did not touch the car. I drove the whole thing.
But you still have to park it yourself, right?
Yeah, I still have to park it
I don't
myself.
get that because there are cars there like BMW makes.
I think you could. I think there might be some way to tell it to park here, but I don't know exactly how to do. I don't know exactly.
Need to get an upgrade or something.
How to do that? It was just I just had to parallel park. I think it can parallel park itself.
So, Bob, if we're looking at technology today, AI, what are you most excited about?
Well, I mean, I think right now we're in the world where where these agentic applications are going to become predominant, and we're going to see them replacing classic SaaS workflows and applications. And that's why I say, if you look at all of the existing applications and all of the asset base that those companies have, there's a fascinating question, which I don't know the answer to, and I think it'll depend on the vendor.
Sure.
But how many of those vendors will effectively make the transition? How many leaders in the SaaS space in a given industry will make the transition to be leaders in the new agentic era? I'll bet it's less than half. I don't know how many make it, and who. I don't know. I can't, predict who will and won't. At one level, those vendors have incredible assets. They've got customers. They've got revenue. They have data. They have lots of data, lots of experience. They understand the problem, but they have legacy. They also have legacy, and they have the entropy associated with that legacy. And a lot of that legacy is not going to be useful. Look at what one of the things that's really interesting is that I'm in the space of data analytics and stuff with Snowflake. And there are always a lot of BI tools out there, which is why Snowflake never did a BI tool. But if you look at BI tools, Tableau kind of set the standard on what a great looking BI tool should look like, and the features and everything, the pretty colors and the maps and all that stuff it did. And although it did not, there's a lot of things Tableau didn't do right, but it did a good job of that from a UI perspective. Is that an asset going forward? I don't actually think so, because all of those tools that let you choose all of those things can be replaced by a prompt.
It's crazy.
And you now tell it to create a graph. And then if the graph isn't what you want, you just tell it how to correct it. You don't have to have the little widgets to change this to a dotted, you wanted a red dotted line, tell it to be a red dotted line. I mean, I think it's that you think about the complexity of that interface. I mean, Tableau probably has 1,000 person years into developing all the widgets associated with that UI, and none of them are necessarily an asset going forward.
Bob, I have a nephew who is currently studying computer science, and a few years ago I said to him, you need to study computer science.
Yeah.
You need to do computer
Yeah,
science.
give him in the wrong direction.
And now he's asking me, you told me I need to learn to
Tell
code.
him to learn data science.
Well, yes. I mean, that's what I'm telling my next nephew.
It's scary. I find this is the saddest thing in the world is that, for 20 years I've encouraged people, 20 plus years, 30 years I've encouraged people to get into
code.
computer science, learn to code. And now I'm not sure at all. Because the hardest part is that entry-level people don't have the skill set yet that you actually need to build these sophisticated applications. What you need is the experience associated with what's right and what's wrong.
First principles thinking.
The first principles, the ability, so people who are later stage in their career are still well positioned, I think. The thing that is interesting and I do think is useful, and certainly a degree in computer science doesn't hurt you in this, is being a product manager or a program manager. Because again, the specifications, at least as long as they're building things for humans, I don't know how long that'll be, but as long as they're building things for humans, the scary day, by the way, which is not that far off, is when the robots start building the robots.
Well,
that's the scary day, is when the robots start, when the robots can build the plants that build the robots.
That's exactly where I wanted to get to, because we'll get to the SaaS to agents piece in a sec, but robots is the next frontier, right? The next big thing, or at least that's what we think it's going to be. In your opinion, is there any part of that world that terrifies you?
Every part of it terrifies me. I mean, look, it's funny. I say when I wrote my book, for a few years ago, I talked about Isaac Asimov as being a hero to me, and I loved all the robot novels growing up and the robot stories, but I never believed I would see it. Now I know I'm going to see it. I mean, if I live for another 10 years, I'm going to see it. It's happening in front of us. And it's interesting because, those stories, which are all science fiction, of course, were really stories about morality and how humans operate with these machines that have some degrees of perfection and yet some degrees of lack of sophistication. And it fascinating stories, with the three laws of robotics, which eventually become the four laws of robotics.
Right.
And it's interesting to understand how we're going to live in that world. Because the one thing I will tell you is that the humanoid robots are coming faster than I thought they were going to come. I think that the mechanical problems they're solved basically. Those problems are basically solved. It's the intelligence that's sort of missing now, and I think it may be 5 years away.
I mean, a year ago, you didn't think we'll be where we are today, right? So,
well, we know that the self-driving cars are coming fast. We know they're coming fast. Mm-hmm. They really are. When I bought an early Tesla Model Y. It's a 2020 Model Y, one of the first couple thousand off the assembly line in Fremont, and I bought the self-driving feature, and it really wasn't very good for a long time.
Right.
I mean, it was basically fancy cruise control, basically. So I paid $10,000 for fancy cruise control. But the damn thing is amazing.
No, it's amazing,
It's amazing. It's amazing.
You just sit back and it gets you from A to B.
I just sit back. It still makes
And
me
it feels
look at the
safer.
road. Oh, absolutely.
Like it keeps you inside the lane.
It's absolutely safer. It's absolutely safer. I mean, and I know that I've got an old processor in there, and so I think the Elon's doing a V5 processor, and that one's supposed to be a lot more powerful. So when that comes out, I'll get a new Tesla.
Well, as far as this robotic world that we're entering, I don't know if you've seen, and Hollywood definitely doesn't shy away from continuing to scare us. I don't know if you've seen a movie called Megan. It's a robot, right? And it's super intelligent, and it kind of makes me think if we're on our way to that world, and some people are optimistic and thinking that's not going to happen, at least not in our lifetime, but there are others that there is a sense.
What does Megan do? What does Megan do?
Oh, so
does she destroy us?
She does. Yeah, she ends
they
up.
always do in the end.
Yes, because she's been programmed to.
Don't give her the nuclear weapons. That's the number one thing. Don't give her the nuclear weapons.
Well, she's been programmed to effectively look after her owner, right? Who's I think a 12-year-old girl, right? And she's been programmed to look after the owner, but she does it at all expense, including.
That I don't think is going to happen. That I don't think. That's I think not that. I think I sort of believe that Asimov was you can say the three laws of robotics were overly simplistic, fine, but I do think we'll get those laws basically right in the robots. I don't think that's going to happen. I do think that what is going to happen is that the level of intelligence is going to be so much that it's going to change what it means to be human, because certainly from my entire life, the thing that differentiated us from every other animal, was the level of intelligence that we had. And we always thought that was not reproducible. Wow. I think about like my dog, my dog, I love my dog. She's really wonderful. Mm-hmm. She's loyal. She's great. She's intelligent, in a dog-like way.
Sure.
But that's not human level of intelligence. Now we're beginning to see these machines that appear at least to have human level intelligence. And we know that in some ways they're beyond human level intelligence, right? In some ways they're much beyond human level intelligence already. And if you go out 5 years, who knows what they have. Now, are they self-directed? That's really interesting. That's when things get interesting. They
have, the last piece I believe will effectively be that emotional intelligence, the free will and the ability to feel.
Yeah, and and this whole self-direct. Right now, they're not self-directed, right?
Sure.
They do what we tell them to do.
Sure.
But when they start having the will, call it what you want, to actually take on things themselves and to learn and grow, which I think they're going to start to program into it in the next 18 months, 24 months.
18 months keeps coming up.
Yeah.
Bob, so that's your biggest thing right now is robots.
Well, I think general. I'm not directly involved in the robots,
sure.
But I'm an interesting watch. I'm an interesting observer. To me, it's how you take and build. I've always been an infrastructure sort of guy, so I think about what are the infrastructure pieces that are needed around these intelligent models. Like say it's not the sexiest thing in the world, but you do need state management for these long-running agentic workflows.
Yeah.
So one of the companies I work with, Temporal, is doing that work.
Mm-hmm.
The semantic models associated with how you define your attributes of a business and build semantic models. that's been something I've been working on.
At Harrison Clark, our recruitment business, what we've seen over the last 2 years is there was a shift away from infrastructure, more focus on ML talent,
Right.
data,
Absolutely.
researchers.
I agree.
And then in the last 6-8 months, infra has come back.
Has it come back? Glad to hear it's coming back. I wasn't glad it's not here. It's not gone forever. I do think, I think it's difficult to build a database company today. I think the databases are, it's like, to me, databases are kind of like kernels, OS kernels are
Right.
now. They're important, but they're kind of done in some ways.
Yeah.
It's interesting. It could be Snowflake and Databricks are the last big database businesses to ever be built. We'll see.
That's two great companies, especially Snowflake. And you said earlier on, Benoit said it takes 50% of the time to build.
He thinks he could. He thinks he could with these tools.
What about 18 months from now?
I don't know. Could be he just does it in 10 minutes.
But that's an interesting thing, right? So while you're saying that,
recreate the Snowflake, and oh my God.
I mean, that world where technology can be built that quickly, what is going to be a exciting, technically complex piece of tech that a Sutter Hill Ventures or a VC or an investor would look at and say, yeah, I want to put my money there?
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I think that the differentiation is that I think the tools, the AI development tools, are going to make it easy for IT organizations to build the straightforward applications that they use to run their business day in and day out, things that particularly for their own employees that they previously might have to buy a SaaS package for. So I think there's some levels of SaaS packages that will get supplanted by, once again, bespoke tools. Ironically, we're sort of back to the future again, because like I say, that's where applications started. But in this case, it'll be built using using software, and the agents will create it. I do think that applications that reason on their own and that learn and grow, those will continue to be areas where there's opportunity. Mm-hmm. So I do think there'll continue to be opportunity for new companies to build industry-specific and category-specific applications that grow and learn over time. So I don't think it goes away, but it will potentially narrow the kinds of categories that are needed for independent applications.
Right. I mean, when you were at Microsoft, you saw the shift from Microsoft Desktop to services. Now we're talking from a shift from SaaS
to Agentic.
Right. What does that look like?
It looks like improving the efficiency of people dramatically. I mean, it's a huge up leveling of capability that should make workers much more effective, and in a way that's concerning, potentially eliminate a number of jobs. I mean, the jobs that are where people are really focused on mind-numbing work. Copy this here, put it there.
Right.
Ones that don't involve more sophisticated decision making, I think, are very much at risk. Just like I think eventually the Uber drivers of the world are at risk.
Yeah, I feel like I hear this a lot, that with all this new technology, people have more free time to do passion work, right? But what happens to earning a living? Well,
it's interesting, and what are the people's passions too? That's the other interesting question. I think we do see, we see some shifts happening, in the macro level in humanity that are somewhat frightening, even without these changes, like the declining birth rates that are happening in every developed country around the world. The only thing that causes birth rates to not be declining is that the country hasn't developed enough yet. And the only continent on the planet that looks like it's going to grow in the next 20 years is Africa. Every other continent's going to shrink in size.
And technology reduces.
It's I think what it really comes down to is that as modern world services become available, parents just don't want to have a lot of kids anymore. You don't need 5 kids to, and having 5 kids is a challenge in a lot of sense.
Yeah.
It's not like they're not taking care of the farm anymore.
Right.
They're not.
It's the breakup of the nuclear family in a way.
Well, that too. That's another element of it. But even in the nuclear families, people are only having 1 or 2 kids. And when I was growing up, there were families, mostly Catholic or Mormon, that had 5, 6, 7 kids.
I mean, I have 5 siblings.
Do you really?
I'm the youngest.
Yeah. See.
Yeah.
You don't see that very much anymore.
No. I mean, I have 20. I mean, I'm 37. I have 24 nephews and nieces.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm an only child, so I lived in a different world. But yeah, I mean, I think those sorts of things are happening that are self-limiting in terms of, what humanity is all about. And it used to be that gross national product was very related to the population. I mean, there's other elements in it, of course, but productivity was always driven by more people. That's not so true anymore. There are other ways to drive productivity.
Over the decades and with all these technology shifts, productivity and efficiency is improving consistently. And as you said, with agents, we become way more productive. Tasks, meaningless tasks go away. But as you said, we're possibly leading to a place where, robots are taking over. There's no longer need for humans to be productive.
I think we're going to live, and this was fascinating because this was also part of Asimov's writing. He really did cover these issues 50 years ago. He did talk about that. Societies where there were 100,000 robots for every person, and what happens in that sort of a world. And I don't think we'll have 100,000 robots, but how long is it until there are more robots than people? Not that long. Not that long.
How many mobile phones do we have?
Well, that's the point. And there's more. It was probably more mobile phones than there are people in the United States.
One last topic I want to touch on, and it really has been amazing having you on the show, Bob. But one last topic I want to touch on is leadership, and as far as hiring talent and creating that culture.
Yeah.
Because again,
I'm glad you're bringing it up because it's been on my list to talk about.
Mm-hmm.
First of all, let's talk about leadership for just a second. Which is there are really three elements to leadership, and this is true whether you're a first-line manager or the CEO of a multinational corporation. Those three elements are strategy, structure, and people. And you cannot be successful unless you are succeeding in all three of those things. You can have a great structure and great people, but if you don't have a viable strategy, if your strategy, if you're focusing on the wrong thing, you will not be successful in the long run. And I learned early on in my career, there was a point where I was at Rome, and this was when I just graduated college, so I was in my early 20s. And when I joined Rome, there was a real problem where, Rome was building software for these PBX systems that they were creating that ran the telephone systems for businesses. And literally there were so many problems in the software development process, the software production process, that they couldn't ship hardware. Mm-hmm. And so I spent like 9 months fixing that and got it fixed, and it was a big deal. And then spent the next 2 years of my career perfecting it. And I realized that nobody gave a damn about what I was doing because it was working and no one cared that it was that much better. And I realized it's just as hard to work on something that nobody cares about as it is to work on something that really matters to people. So it's important to find a strategy and do something that really matters and is really differentiated to people. The second thing is the structure, which is scaling is all about structure. It's about structure and people, but because you need the right people to scale. But if you don't have the structures in place to be able to help, and that includes software infrastructure and leadership structure and organizational structure, all of those attributes are part of structure. But you need those sorts of structures to be able to scale organizations. If you look at organizations that have been particularly effective, I sort of think of Google in some ways as being an amazing example of this in the sense that, the data center environment of Google is one of the most amazing creations of all time. And that structure enabled them to build software nobody else could possibly build. Now, Google had some odd leadership characteristics in some other areas where their structure might have been messed up. I'm not sure it made sense to have 100 people working for one manager, for example. But they did some things from an engineering perspective that were structural that made dramatic differences in their ability to succeed relative to their competitors. And then the third element is always people and having the right people and having people that have the capability to do the job. And that changes over time. When you're a small company and you're growing quickly, jobs outgrow people all the time. And you could have somebody that's incredibly effective in their job And then a year later, they're no longer able to do it because the organization has scaled beyond them. They're still good people. They're still good people. In most cases, you want to retain those people, or in many cases, you want to retain those people. Maybe not all, but some cases. But they can't be the leader of that organization anymore.
The company continues to...
Because the company's outgrown them. The company's outgrown them. And you need somebody that has experience associated with that.
Is that all levels?
It is. It's all levels. I mean, first line... moving from individual contributor to being a first-line manager is hard. Not everybody can do it. A lot of people...
The most difficult move.
A lot of people will stay an individual contributor for their whole life.
Right.
First line to second line is quite difficult because, first line you can know everything that's going on in the your organization. Second line, you really can't. You have 40 people working for you. You really can't know everything. And if you try to, you screw up. You become a control freak and people hate it. And then, scaling beyond that third line, fourth line, you become more and more remote from your line employees, and so you have to manage differently, and you have to begin to manage managers, and ultimately, you're really managing very senior managers that really own their discipline. And I had that at Microsoft, and I certainly had it at Snowflake. But the other thing I would say that's really important is that there is a glue that can be applied to hold all of this together, and that's values. And I think values are a critical thing for every company. I was just talking to a CEO that recently took over the company that he was running. And, we started talking for 45 minutes. And at the end, we were talking about this. And I said, it was my first time I talked to him. And I said, are your values on your web? And he said, no. And I said, oh, do you have values? He said, well, not really. And I said, well, you need values. I mean, there's a few good reasons for that. And he said, well, we have a lot of, discipline and a lot of attributes of the company that I'm very proud of. And I said, well, immortalize those in values then. Build them into the values that make you unique as a company, and then put it on the web. Because if it's not on the web, your values aren't on the web, you're not a values-based company. Now, just because your values are on the web doesn't mean you're a value-based company. But because a lot of companies don't live their values. But, I look at a company, certainly Snowflake was an example of a values-based company, and our values were built by leadership inside Snowflake, plus the engagement from many people inside the company. It was a company-wide process.
Right.
And at the top of our values was putting our customers first, very customer-centricity.
Sure.
And I thought that was super important. Integrity was super important. Thinking big, all those sorts of things are important. For us, that meant a lot to who we were. And I think it established the foundation of what made Snowflake such a great company and why people didn't just like the product. They liked working with the company. And, I was fortunate. I learned a lot of that from Jeff Bezos at Amazon, because Jeff is a values-based guy. He's a customer-centric guy. And the Amazon leadership principles are a fantastic example of values. And people at Amazon live those leadership principles. They refer to them in meetings, just like we would refer to our values in Snowflake in the meetings. And I think that has established one of the reasons why Amazon has been so successful. Nordstrom is a great values-based company. You know who isn't a values-based company? Google. It's interesting.
So how do they grow then?
You don't have to be values-based to grow. You don't have to be values. They had great technology. They had those other things. They had Urs built this amazing system that scaled. But it's interesting. In the late 2018, I think there was the whole James Damore thing. I don't know if you remember that, where one of their engineers wrote this missive that was this crazy missive, and I was running Snowflake at the time, and I'm like, this is a problem. Oh, this is a problem. And I Googled Google values. And they weren't there. You couldn't find, and they just didn't have them. And now Sundar has tried to create values, but that place is such a zoo with so many different opinions.
Right.
It's almost impossible to reimpose values across that entire organization. So if you don't do it early in the process, it's incredibly difficult to do it as an add-on later. Almost takes a leadership change to do it, I would say.
So you said strategy. So that's more of the focus of what are we actually doing? What are we building? Right?
Exactly.
And then structure is how you lay out.
How you lay out the mechanisms to make it happen. And that's organizational structure as well as the operational mechanisms to scale the company, which can, which in the case of Google was included how they built data centers.
So you don't believe in a flat structure?
I believe that, I don't believe in total flat.
Because how many people can one manager actually manage?
A good manager at a senior level can maybe do 10 or 12, something like that. But that's a lot. That's a lot. And
I struggle at 5.
5 is more typical as to where you can go.
I think that's like the max I've been
I
able
think
to
for
do it.
most managers, that's true.
Yeah. Because then you're spending all your day just managing.
Or you're not managing. More likely you're
Or
not
not managing.
Or
yeah.
more likely you're not
Or
managing.
micromanaging, which is the worst.
Or more likely you're not
Yeah.
managing.
Last piece, people. This is amazing. Sometimes I feel like I should pay tuition for these conversations just because I learn so much. But this last piece around people. Now, I run a people business.
Yeah.
I'm all about placing people into Silicon Valley companies. Besides the technical skills and educational background and which company they worked for and what was the engineering culture of those companies, but as far as an individual, when you were building Snowflake and the teams you built in Microsoft, because you've had, I'm assuming, many engineers and people under your management, what was the one thing that you looked for? And perhaps the one thing that you were assessing when you interviewed somebody?
Does somebody have do they have the intellectual capability and the desire to actually do what needs to be done? When people want to join a job and they have the capability to do it, they've got the resume, they've got all the things they can do it, but they really see the potential for this to happen. Do they believe in the mission? It's so much better to have people that are driven by that than just like this is a job. This is a job to me. So the spark, the energy. It's the energy more than anything else, I would say.
How do you assess that? Do you have a pre-qualifying question?
Partly you just talk to them about what they'd be doing, and you see how they react, right? And how do people, and sometimes people are low key, so you have to be careful to not, not everybody is jumping up and down, but you sort of have to watch how they react. And sometimes in the process of interviewing, you see they go back, they do some research, and then they come back and they tell you some things, and it's like, okay, this person's really interested in this. This really matters to them. Because that, to me, is what makes the difference, especially in these jobs which, to some extent, are mission-driven. If you're in tech, when we were at Microsoft in the early days, the key to Microsoft was always come to Microsoft to change the world. And, we did. We really, really did. And in a better way, in a good way. And so we hired people that were successful in doing that. And when you saw that, that really made the difference.
I know I said that was the final topic. There is one last question I'm really eager to ask you. Microsoft has won this game for a very, very long time, maintained...
remarkably, actually.
Yeah. How?
Well, it's been through multiple CEOs, right? So it's different leadership styles and things. Partly it built one of the world's greatest business, a couple of the world's greatest businesses. It is a multi-product family company. So they have now multiple sustainable printing presses of money. They have the Windows printing press, they've got the Office printing press, they've got the Azure printing press, the server applications, all that stuff. So they have a lot of different sources of revenue that are very, very helpful. Mm-hmm. Part of it has been that culture that I think Steve and Bill created in the early day with where they're always hungry, they're always paranoid. There's a lot of paranoia at Microsoft. You talk to them. Actually, I saw them at this Microsoft people the other day. They're always very paranoid. They believe the world can change underneath them. They need to be ready for it.
And that's what Bill instilled in the beginning.
Yeah, and Satya has really given them some great vision and done some really, really effective things. The partnership with OpenAI was one of the greatest and most brilliant things I've seen anyone do. And it was incredibly beneficial in the early days to both companies. It gave OpenAI the leg up it needed to get to become super successful, and it thrust Microsoft into the apex of AI, which no one would have believed.
Sure.
No one would have believed that Microsoft would be ahead of Google in AI. You must be kidding me. Google invented AI, for God's sakes. They invented the transformer model. They had every single substantial engineer that's ever done anything in AI working for Google at one point in time. And yet they fell behind Microsoft, who literally, the one person that made a huge difference at Microsoft was named Satya that did all that.
It's a great business deal.
It was. Now, it's struggling and it's going to have a hard time because, they've now kind of become in competition with each other on everything. So that deal's got to get reset, which I'm pretty sure those guys are doing something about.
What's the difference between Seattle in Silicon Valley?
Seattle is people are much more loyal to where they are. First of all, there's just not as many companies there. The other big thing, and I don't think this is necessarily a good thing, but no, it's not a good thing, which is their non-compete is enforceable in Seattle.
Is enforceable.
Enforceable in the state of Washington.
Wow. I don't think that's a good thing.
It's not a good thing. Not a fan of the non-compete.
Because how many companies today wouldn't exist if that?
I know. So here, people move easily between companies because they can move. They can take their knowledge of intellectual property with them. They can't take the intellectual property with them, but they can take their intrinsic knowledge and experience with them. Where you really can't do that without some break in the Washington State area, and I think that's a big difference. And so Seattle has all the big companies have major sites in Seattle now, and there's dozens of startups, but not thousands like there are here.
I think, I'm originally from the UK, from London. I think this is where the UK, and in particular Europe in general, fails to win. It's this over-regulation,
absolutely.
Too many
Europe
laws.
in general, and the UK has become just as bad, unfortunately.
Yeah.
You would think that with Brexit they'd get better, but they've actually gotten worse, if anything.
Yeah.
It's sad.
Yeah.
Sad to see. The whole free speech thing in Britain, oh my God,
Yes.
what a disaster.
Well, it has been honestly an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for coming on the show. I want to finish off with a question that we always ask every guest. And Inside Silicon Mind is all about learning and getting into the mind of, I know you're Seattle and Silicon Valley, but getting into the mind of tech leaders. Is there a book that you would recommend to our listeners?
Yeah, it's an oldie but a goodie, which is Peter Thiel's 0 to 1. I really think it applies very much to people starting out. And I when I read it, it was just like everything about this book resonates with me. So I think it's still something that's good for people to read.
I love it. Bob,
Thanks
you
a lot.
so much.
Thanks. Good to see you.
so much.
This podcast was brought to you by Serrana Labs and powered by Harrison Clark. At Harrison Clark, we're at the heart of Silicon Valley's evolution and at the intersection of search and venture, funding the companies shaping the future and connecting them to the most elite cloud, data, and AI talent. To learn more, visit harrisonclark.com. If today's episode challenged your thinking, then share it with someone who's driving innovation. For even more insights on achieving product market fit, subscribe to our newsletter, The PMF Playbook, where we break down the journey from zero to product market fit. Visit thepmfplaybook.com. For more episodes, follow us on social media or visit InsideTheSiliconMind.com. Until next time, stay curious, stay consistent, and stay inside the Silicon Mind. See you soon.